Right, it is 10:30, so let's make a start. Good morning and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. One major item this morning, the medium-term financial strategy. So we'll make a start. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Scrutiny Commission, which of course is being webcast live to the public. For those not able to watch the footing live, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. So that'll be something to look forward to. Can I remind members and officers to switch on their microphones when you speak and then switch it off, please, when you finish speaking. Item 1, minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held at the last meeting are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Are we all in agreement that I do that? Thank you. Item 2 is question time. I've not received any questions. Item 3, questions from members. Similarly, no questions from members. Item 4, there are no urgent items that we need to take today. And so that takes us to item 5, declarations of members' interest in respect of items on today's agenda. Does anyone have an interest to declare? No? All happy with that? Item 6, declaration of the party whip. No. Item 7, presentation of petitions. There are no petitions. So that takes us to the substantive items, which is item 8 first, medium-term financial strategy. Now, for those that haven't been through this process before, what we do is we break it down into hopefully manageable chunks. We first of all look at the Council's overall position on the budget, and I would refer you in particular to the report that was considered by the Cabinet, which was attached to your papers, dated the 12th of December, and that sets out the overall position. We'll then move on to look at the departments for which the Commission is responsible, which is primarily the Chief Executives and the Corporate Resources Department and their individual budgets. And then finally, we'll look at the summary of what the other committees considered in relation to the medium-term financial strategy in the Council's budget. Now, they were sent out yesterday. There is an additional pack headed additional agenda supplement, and that is the minutes of scrutiny, all four scrutiny committees. So I hope that's clear how we'll proceed. We'll start then with item 8, which is the medium-term financial strategy, the context, the setting and the overall position. Could I welcome this morning the table, Chris Tambini, Director of Finance, Byron Rhodes, Lead Member for Resources, Deputy Leader of the Council, Nick Rushton, Leader of the Council, John Sinnott, Chief Executive, and Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance. Okay, nearly got it all right, didn't I, on that? So, I believe, Chris, you would like to start off and introduce the scene setting of where we are. Thank you.
If I could just make a couple of comments. Firstly, about what's in the papers that went to Cabinet before Christmas, but then secondly, about the settlement which actually came out after those papers were published. So in terms of the budget papers that were considered by Cabinet, I mean, it is a challenging medium-term financial outlook. The MTFS includes significant growth of £40 million over the 4 years, of which 17 million is actually for children's social care. So there's a huge demand in terms of children's social care. It's got identified savings of £36 million within the budget, but there's also a gap of £18 million by the time you get to 2021-22. So we've still got some more savings to find. In terms of the savings, there's no doubt there are some difficult savings, both politically, some fairly hard ones such as early help, but there's also quite a lot of efficiency savings that are quite difficult technically to deliver, and also some fairly kind of large income targets as well. So it will be a challenge to deliver this MTFS. The strategy is based on a council tax increase of 4% next year. That's 2% on the adult social care precept and 2% on what I'm going to call core council tax. So that's for the next 2 years, 4%, and then after that it goes down to 2% because the adult social care can only be levied for the next 2 years. If I make some just comments about the capital programme, the capital programme is probably the largest capital programme we've ever had as a county council, nearly 290 million over 4 years. But having said that, there are some major unfunded capital demands. such as roads, schools, IT. There's a large populations increase forecast within Leicestershire, and that brings with it sort of certain demands around infrastructure. So if you look within the capital programme, there's a long list of future developments which aren't fully financed. If I now can make a couple of comments around the settlement. In some respects, the settlement was disappointing, and the most disappointing aspect from my perspective was the fact we didn't get selected as a business rate retention pilot. And we anticipated that would actually bring £19 million into Leicester and Leicestershire, and we didn't get that pilot. They also ceased the transitional grant, which was worth £3 million to us, and when we'd had some news that possibly that could continue over the next couple of years. And also there was no acknowledgement of particularly the pressure around children's social care. There were some positive things in there. We got a little bit of extra money. We got a little bit of extra new hands bonus, some other changes that will bring in about £1 million a year, so that's positive. But they also introduced some greater flexibility around council tax increase. So for 18-19, there's the possibility in terms of core council tax, it could go up by a further 1%. And possibly the same again in 1920, but that will depend on what the inflation rate is at that time, and it's at the discretion of the Secretary of State. In terms of the adult social care precept, just to remind members that you can increase it by 6% over 3 years. This year's the first year of that. So you can either go 222 over those 3 years, or 330, or another permutation. But the cap is 6% over 3 years. So that hasn't changed. That's really all I was going to say by way of introduction.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Nick, would you like to make some sort of statement about how you see things at the moment, perhaps where we are on fair funding, what you're disappointed about in the settlement or pleased about in the settlement?
Most disappointing thing for me was not getting the business rates pilot, which pursuing the Secretary of State to ask why we didn't get it, it would have helped us no end, especially with some of the capital problems. So exceedingly disappointed about that. On fair funding, as you know, Byron is the lead person probably in all the county councils in the country. So on fair funding, I'll defer to Byron, but happy to attend and happy to answer questions going forward, Simon. So, Byron, do you want to say
Thank you.
about
Byron, would you like to make an opening statement?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I agree with the leader that the the problem with not getting that business rate devolution pilot has certainly put considerable pressure on our capital programme, because we had put together a very good proposal for using it for infrastructure in the county, and of course we had the support of the district councils and also the city in that bid as well. And having ticked all the boxes, you makes you wonder why we didn't get the allocation when other people, who in our view did not tick the boxes, actually did get their bids approved. But that's the way of things. On the fair funding side, just before Christmas was an ideal time, I think, to launch a major consultation. The consultation on fair funding came out, and no doubt you all read that before you started your Christmas festivities. I certainly studied it in some detail, as you might imagine. It gave us some encouragement in that they did talk about resetting the system with a needs-led model and having fewer indicators of need than the present 120 or so are in the present formula, which is to all but the most committed people totally incomprehensible. I think the former Secretary of State, Sir Eric Pickles, once remarked there were only 3 people that had understood the local government system, and they'd never met each other. Well, at least 2 of them are inside this county council, so that's a great help to us. But even then, elsewhere, there's lack of comprehension. So the fair funding system needs to be simpler, and it needs to be more logical. Less encouraging in that consultation that's launched is this attachment that the DCLG, as it then was, it's now the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, attached to the regression systems for determining indicators and also for doing their calculations. And so it's not all gone our way, and we've got a considerable amount of work still to do to persuade civil servants and ministers that a simpler system along the lines that we put forward, which is now generally known as the Leicestershire model, and is widely supported, particularly amongst the county councils network and some unitaries, that is actually a much better way forward. But even if when we reset the system, in our view it should be reset because of the wide disparity between the funding of some councils and the funding of county councils, which tend to be near the bottom, like it's almost a 2-to-1 ratio. So the best funded council in the country is a council in central London, and the worst funded is Windsor and Maidenhead, which is interesting, and we're fourth from the bottom out of the 150 top-tier councils. So there needs to be a closing of the gap and a more reasonable settlement of that. So the battle still goes on, and the debate will take place during 2018. The government has said that they're going to bring in this new system from April 2020, which is only 2 years away. And that's when the 4-year settlement that we're currently working on runs out, of course. They're also going to bring in business rates devolution at that point. And one of the things they announced in the settlement that there will be, they're envisaging in the future that they will devolve 75% of the business rates growth to councils. I didn't say all the business rates because they have to use a top-up and tariff system for that, for equalising, which of course is what the fair funding system's all around. The one thing that's missing from this debate, and I've been pushing this hard at the Resources Board, which I attended the other day at the Local Government Association, and with other people involved in this debate, is that there is no pressure at the moment on the high-funded councils to reduce their costs. The enormous pressure has been on us because we've had to reduce our costs in order to survive. And as we go through this debate about our proposals today, you'll see that by and large we have survived, even though we're nearly the worst funded council in the country. But other councils which have been well funded have carried on spending, and spending in a way which is a way we cannot afford to do. So we've had to remodel all our systems through our transformation programme, which has been a major consolidation and cost reduction programme. But other councils haven't. And so in the future there needs to be, I think, a major pressure nationally to reduce costs for councils which are well funded and shouldn't be as well funded as they are, to reduce their costs and come into line with the rest of us. And that isn't there at the moment. And then the other thing, of course, that's got to happen in the future is some encouragement and support for councils who can lead the programmes for improving prosperity in the local areas, and that's a major thing, because as councils improve their prosperity, they get more business rates, and then they can do more things for local residents. And these sort of programmes can only be led at the local level. They're not national; they're local. I don't think there's yet a full recognition throughout the country that that's the right way to go.
Right, okay, thanks very much for that. So we'll now take some questions and clarifications that members want to ask. Can we start then with council tax? So since the draft MTF was published and the Cabinet considered that, as Chris has said, the government is prepared to allow councils to put the element of the council tax up another 1%. What's the current thinking on that? Do you want to take that, Pyro?
Well, clearly we've got a number of options which the settlement's given us, and we've also got a number of pressures. We've also, as you know, been consulting the public about our proposals, which are in the paper that's in front of you today. And that consultation closed Sunday evening, so we are considering the results of that. One of the questions that was asked was the council tax question, if you remember. So that's a matter under consideration, and what we're planning to do is to bring all these various factors together, and adjustments such as the extra £1 billion a year, which opportunities that gives us, together in a new version of the MTFS, which is currently in preparation. And that will be launched in the Cabinet paper, which will be published next Tuesday, ready for the Cabinet meeting on the 9th of February. So that's the next iteration, and this is the way, of course, we normally proceed in these matters. Pardon?
I think it's Wednesday, we think, Barry.
It might be Wednesday, yes. It is the 9th of
So you can't share that with us at the
so
moment?
So I can't share that with you at the moment, because
recommendations
we will be making announcements about that on Tuesday.
Okay. Are there any other factors that have changed significantly since that document? So sometimes, the districts are a bit late in telling us what their bases are and so on. Or, in other words, are we expecting any more money to come in? Are there any other grants that could come in from anywhere that weren't known at that time that would help? I remember last year something happened and the situation improved, and that was one of the reasons why you were able to not do the bus 1.2 million.
Yeah, there will be some other changes. I mentioned the £1 million on the settlement, and you've intoned about the council tax base. We've now got some figures in from the districts, and the council tax base has actually increased higher than we'd factored in. So we think that the actual total increase is about over 5 million. So that will give us another bit over £1 million as well. We'll also look at the latest budget monitoring and see whether the growth that we factored in as well can be kind of changed. So I imagine there'll be a little bit of extra resource coming through, probably in the region of sort of £2 to £3 million extra.
Okay, that's helpful to know that. Can we just ask about business rates then? So we didn't get the pilot, and we're all obviously disappointed. But next year, of course, we run out of revenue support grant, don't we? This is the last year we get that, and it will be zero. So after that, we'll be completely dependent on business rates, council tax, and other traded services and so on. But you warned before that the concern is that the government will then start clawing back business rates. What have you made assumptions? Does this 4-year strategy assume that will happen or won't happen?
Yeah, but the strategy assumes that they'll continue to claw back business rates. So year after next, we know in the current 4-year settlement it's a minus 3 million they take from business rates in that year. The following 2 years of the MTFS, we're assuming they're going to take in the order of £10 million a year. So we are assuming that they're going to keep doing that. So if things are kind of better than we anticipate, obviously that does improve our position.
Which, in my view, Chairman, is exceedingly unfair and something which I abhor, in all honesty, and cannot, even though it's my government's policy, cannot support it. It's ridiculous that not only do we not get grant, where we're low funded, they now start taking money off us, which is appalling.
I think we'd all agree with that, particularly when, as you say, we've completely lost revenue support grants. Not that long ago, it was 80, 90 million we used to get revenue support grant. 100 million. Okay, right. Who would like to ask some questions? Start with Rosie and then David.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. We have talked so much about being underfunded, yet there's quite a lot of growth in the budget. Could you just elaborate on some of the items of growth?
Most of it is in children's social care, which is where most of our pressures are. Chris will run through some of the items. Can you do that, Chris?
As the leader said, the largest element of growth by a long chalk is children's social care, mainly around looked after children. So there's been a roughly around an 8% per year increase in the number of children we look after. So that's kind of factoring in, and there's an overspend this year. So nearly half of the £40 million growth relates to that. The other kind of elements of growth are around adult social care as well. So that's another key element of it. But I'd say that the key thing that's driving this budget is children's social care growth. And it's really the numbers. And we also put in a little bit of extra money following the Ofsted inspection last year as well.
There is a summary the Chief just showed me, Rosie, on page 17 at the top.
Okay. You right, Rosie, too?
Yeah.
Yep. David, Bill.
Just an observation on what Byron and Nick has said. Obviously, as our situation is so is so obviously unfair, then I hope this is something that the whole authority can get behind and give support to the ridiculous situation we find ourselves in. I mean, this question of we have to improve the prosperity of the area in order to boost the council tax base. Well, we'll all agree with that, but and everybody wants to see better prosperity for all the people we represent. But we have to be careful, because if it's unrestrained growth, which is something we're going to come to next week once again, we're going to undermine the basis of what Leicestershire is all about, which is a balance between prosperous market towns and villages and countryside. If we start to lose the countryside simply because we are so desperate for growth at all costs, then we undermine the sort of what we're all about as a county. One thing I've picked up from my involvement with the East Midlands is a sense of despair amongst the leaders across the East Midlands that all the counties of the 5 counties of East Midlands are all losing out heavily in relation to other parts of the country. We come bottom of the league in not just fair funding, but in terms of capital investment and in terms of social mobility. There's a whole range of indices which are regularly produced, which show that the East Midlands as a whole is losing out, and Leicestershire seems to lose out worse than the lot, even though it's Northamptonshire who look as if they're going to be in real trouble. Well, they are in real trouble. And it's always explained to me it's because of the lack of leadership amongst the counties, amongst the city and counties, that over in the West Midlands they've decided to go for a mayor, and all the funds that are available are drifting over to the West Midlands. And we just do not figure on the government's view of what needs to be done in this part of the country. And somehow we've got to tackle that. We've got to raise the profile not only of the county but of the whole region if we're going to start to put these matters right.
Thank you for that statement. I think. Did you want to respond?
Yeah, more of a statement. I mean, the prosperity of the area. We are, whether you like it or not, one of the fastest growing areas in Leicestershire in particular, and parts of the county, the fastest growing areas in the country, apart from some places in the southeast. Mr. Bill does not particularly like growth in his area. I'm sure he's going on about our expressway and the housing numbers which are going to go in there. But we do need to provide houses and for people who cannot afford them. If we don't provide houses at a reasonable cost in areas that people want to live, certain people will never ever afford to be able to buy a house. So we do need to provide vast housing numbers going forward to cope with population growth and the growth of our economy. And Mr. Bill has been fairly consistent, I suppose, in opposing any sort of growth in his area. I don't agree with him. I think growth is important. The faster we grow, the more money we get in, the more we can spend on services. I can only just cite a small example in my own little town where I represent at Ashby. The housing growth in 1 year was 400 houses, and that gave my little town council an extra 35,000 to spend. Now, if you equate that across the whole county and bring it up to here, it does give us a lot more money to spend because the council tax base is growing, and with the growth in the council tax base, we can provide more and more services without having to raise council tax, even though we are badly funded. That doesn't mean we're not going to raise council tax, but it does help. On the leadership of the East Midlands, I'll acknowledge that we are disadvantaged by the West Midlands, but we do our best. David actually serves on East Midlands councils where these sorts of issues are raised. I meet all the strategic leaders, apart from Derby City, who are very hard to get hold of, but I do meet all the upper tier leaders on a regular basis. There is another meeting scheduled for early February, hosted by Kay in Nottinghamshire, where we are trying to get our act together to balance the Metro Mayor. Now, we didn't want a Metro Mayor in the East Midlands, so we do need to act together to counterbalance Andy Street and the vast council, which is Birmingham City Council. But we do our best. It's not something that I ignore, David, and through having good relationships, not just with Tory leaders, but also with SPS in the city and John in Nottingham, you know, I do my best to make sure the East Midlands is not disadvantaged because the West has an elected mayor and a huge city council in Birmingham.
Okay, thanks for that. Terry Arnhem.
Thank you, Chair. I think we all have to recognise the good work that our staff have put into reducing costs in this council to keep inside what is an increasingly shrinking budget. What I need to understand, though, is from a public health point of view, the greatest predictor of future prosperity is past prosperity. And the model of taking all business rates seems to depend on a philosophy of unto those that have, more shall be given. Whereas we're actually campaigning as a council on the fairer funding strategy, which is on the principle of from each according to his ability to each according to his need, diametrically opposed philosophies. What we have then in the Leicester and Leicestershire growth strategy is a recognition that in some areas there are places like Colville who are waiting for transport infrastructure so that they can grow. So what I need to understand really is how, as a council, philosophically, we're going to square the circle between those two diametrically opposed ways of funding the council on a national level by the way that we campaign. At the moment, we seem to be campaigning on two fronts, complaining that we don't get the business rates pilot while we're actually proposing a model that is entirely differently engineered. And also locally, how are we going to ensure that no part of the county is structurally disadvantaged and prevented from having growth and achieving prosperity?
To take that. Can I just say, I don't want to get too much into... We've got a session in a couple of weeks' time specifically on the growth plan, which I believe you're both coming back to. So let's focus on the financial aspects and the growth and how it's going to be delivered and infrastructure. We've got a good session on that in a couple of weeks.
Let me just take on the funding side of things. This is a little bit of a repeat of my opening statement, but let me just put it in a slightly different way. We are at this situation at the moment in this country where there's this huge disparity between the funding of councils in different parts of the country, with some parts getting far more than others. And that can't be reset simply by growth. The Local Government Association, unfortunately, seem to believe that it can, and I don't agree with them. I think there has to be a reset. It can be done in an orderly way, because I'm certainly not one of those who takes the view the right way is then to cut the budgets of the best funded councils and put them under unreasonable pressure, which they would then have to slash and burn services. That's not the right way to go about it. But I think over time, those better off councils have got to reduce their costs, and that allows for more money then to be redistributed to the councils like Leicestershire that are very poorly funded in comparison. And the model that we put forward actually shows how the extent to which that needs to be done to reset the whole system, and that's what we've been campaigning for. Sadly, the penny has not yet dropped in local government or in main government, in my view, that there is just got to be this major problem of cost reduction in the better off councils. Now, we've seen it in this council. We've reduced our costs in this council by £178 million a year, and the programme that we've got in the next 4 years takes it another £54 million beyond that. And so that's a massive problem, and in many ways that has gone too far. We're starting to bite into vital services now that people value, and we're getting resistance from the public to that, and we know that. But we're having to go there because we simply haven't got the money to fund everything that we would like to do. So that's where the unfairness really lies. But then you've also got to look to the future. And this is where, and going back to Mr. Bill's point, you do have to look to growth. And growth is not delivered by national programmes. It's fostered by national programmes, but it is local people and local prosperity that drives it. It's organic. It comes from the bottom, and this is why there is a big role for top-tier authorities like county councils, like the big unitary councils as well, to be the leaders of growth in their areas. And it's right to point out that in the West Midlands that they've got their act together. We have to do much more in the East Midlands and specifically in Leicestershire as well. I have to say that it can be dragged back by people who think that who are constantly looking to the issues in their own localities and can't be prepared to take the bigger decisions to allow that growth to continue. So planning decisions very often, the slowness of them and the perverseness of some decisions sometimes actually impede growth. So there have to be mechanisms which actually encourage it. And in particular, when we get to the growth plan, which you're going to talk about in a fortnight, I think I'd like to say much more about how that could be brought about.
Okay, thank you very much for that. David Slater.
Thank you, Chairman. In the context of our constrained financial situation that we all know about, I see that we are managing to repay some debt, and we are investing capital in income streams, which seems to me to be a very positive move. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about our strategy in this direction and how far you see it going, specifically with the debt repayment, and how are we managing to fund investment that it brings us in some welcome general revenue income.
As a matter of principle, we don't like debt and we don't like to borrow, but I'll let Chris or Byron answer how we're repaying it. But we're repaying debt and we're not borrowing, but there's more detail behind it than that.
Yeah, I think I'll let Mr. Tambini just give you a few of the facts, and then I will come in then at the end of his remarks.
As I mentioned in the opening statement, it's the largest capital programme we've ever had, 290 million, but we're not borrowing to fund that capital programme. So that's financed principally by government grant, particularly around kind of highways and education, but also by a kind of combination of kind of revenue underspends, capital receipts, and other discretionary resources. So that's what we're kind of using to fund it. In terms of since 2010, I can't remember the exact figures. I'm going to look over at Declan in terms of the amount of debt we've paid off. Is it about 50 million? Yeah, so I think we've actually voluntarily paid off about £50 million in debt. So, and that's kind of saved in the order of about £3 or £4 million a year in terms of revenue costs. So we've made a really good attempt at reducing our debt burden, and actually our capital programme in the future, we're not anticipating we're going to take on a huge amount of debt. You mentioned the investment in terms of generating income in terms of the asset investment fund. Again, that's a strategy that we started probably about 3 or 4 years ago. So we've got a number of asset purchases, and we do anticipate within this current MTFS that'll be an extra £2 million of income comes through that route. Actually, I'm kind of hopeful it'll be more than £2 million by the time we get to year 4.
Yes, I can add to that. I mean, the £50 million is the recent debt, although if you cast your minds back to 2009-10, and I was looking through the MTFS for that year a week or so ago, just to see where we've come from. The debt that was reported at that time in a similar meeting to this was about 370 odd million. So overall, we've come down about 100 million in that sort of overall period. We still have £265 million of debt, and this is recorded in the paper. And it takes £23 million of our revenue just to service it, pay the interest on it. And some of it is very long term, but it's at interest rates which were much higher when it was first taken out, and we're locked into a lot of that debt because of the terms of it. We can't repay it earlier without huge penalties, and so we, on the balance, the Treasury decisions that have to be taken, so you have to continue with it. But we also have, of course, the rules which are set down in law that we need to make provision each year for that repayment for eventually when it comes through the minimum revenue provision. So what we're able to do is we have to set aside that money. We can't use that money for capital programs, but we can use it to invest it properly and get the best possible returns. In the past, it's generally sat in bank accounts or in short-term deposits. What we're judged to be better now is to invest it, because it is for quite considerable periods, to invest it in property. And so we're looking for investments which will give a much better rate of return, but also investments that we can dispose of when we need to repay the debt. And of course, it will be for our successors long into the future who will make those decisions. Because some of the debts, some of it will be 20 or 30 years' time, and I don't think any of us will be actually county councillors in that time. But they may roll it forward. They may decide to pay it off. There's a lot to be said, by the way, for a debt-free council. I used to lead a district council, and one of the decisions I was able to take in the early days was to repay all the debt, and I think there are other debt-free councils in Leicestershire as well. That gives you a lot of flexibility if you can do that. We don't have that flexibility because we are where we are. So what we're doing is we are finding the money from those resources that we've got, which we can't use for our main capital programs, which we're still having to service as Mr. Tambini's outlined. But for the other monies, which we can't use for that, we're putting it into sensible investments.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. I've got Michael Charlesworth next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of observations and a couple of questions, really. I mean, on the fairer funding, it's got to be pursued. It's a great idea, I think, fairer funding. And even if we do get a fairer funding scheme sometime in the 2020s, it still won't be the answer to all our problems. You'll see the overly funded authorities cap back, and you may see ours go up a little, but it won't be enough, I believe, to solve all of our issues around funding. Going back to housing was mentioned, I believe housing and business development is absolutely essential for so many reasons. I've got a lot of housing in my patch. There's been resistance to it, but I can see the benefits that it brings. And I think a vibrant economy will do far more for Leicestershire than the government ever will. So I think that is a positive way forward. The mention was made of the largely unfunded capital programme, and as Byron just said, we're not looking to borrow any more money. So how do we finance that capital programme? I mean, do we put it on hold? Do we dispose of assets? Or do we, in fact, borrow more? That's one question. And then the other one's back to council tax. We've been given the opportunity through the social care precept and the extra 1% that was announced just before Christmas to actually do 6% this year and 6% next year. And as unpalatable as that sounds to me and taxpayers across Leicestershire, surely it makes economic sense to do it in the early stages and build up the base, then spread it over so many years. Because we only know with certainty what's happening in the next 2 to 3 years. After that, we may not get any of these offers of rises at all. I did see in the response to the finance settlement, which I think was from Chris, that they would like to see the mechanics regarding the referendum and core principle being removed to give us the latitude to do what we need to do for Leicestershire. So just those two questions, really.
So I think there's a technical question there, and then I think there's more of a political question, really coming back to the long-term issue on council tax and the strategy. If the caps were lifted, what's going to be our response to that?
Shall we deal with the technical stuff first? Because the capital programme, I think Mr. Tambini is well placed to answer that, and I'll come in on the other things.
I think it's a really good point, to be honest. If you look at the list of unfunded schemes that are in the paper, it's a long list. And I think our back of the fag packet calculation is that could be in the order of 100 million, and that really is back of the fag packet calculation, but it's a big figure. We've put aside in the order of about 25 million to kind of finance that, which is clearly leaves quite a big gap. What we've been very good at over the last kind of 5 years is identifying money that comes through, so be it underspends, be it capital receipts, be it little bits of government money that come through, and we put that aside to finance it. So the first call will be to do that will be to try and, when we see some money, we'll put it in there, we'll put it aside to fund those capital kind of projects. If that doesn't prove enough, we might end up having to do some prudential borrowing. But if we ever did have to do that, I can't see us having to do that for at least another kind of 4 or 5 years. But that'll be the last thing we do. But I think we just carry the current strategy of tight finances, any underspends, any capital receipts, any other kind of opportunities, we put that into that capital fund.
And of course, maximising the value of our assets. So, it does mean that we have to apply for planning permission on land that we own, but we have a principle that we need to maximise the value of our assets. Sometimes you'll get members come to me and say, why is the county applying for this permission here, this permission there? If we don't maximise the value of our assets, we won't be able to fund the corporate programme from our own money, and we'll have to do prudential borrowing. So if you, as a member, if you do see a county application which you may or may not like, I don't particularly see it, but we've instructed that the property department must maximise the value of our assets and sell stuff to get money in to enable us to do the jobs that we're doing.
Yeah, let me just take the fair funding. It's not often that I agree with Mr. Charlesworth, but he's right. It is a terrific battle we're having over fair funding, and one would love to think that the government will say, with a splendid announcement beginning of 2020, well, we're going to reset the system and everybody's going to be funded on a fair basis from April. And I don't see that happen. There would have to be some transition. And I think the way to manage the transition is the way in which I've described, by putting the pressure onto the better funded councils to reduce their costs, because certainly they could deliver an equivalent level of services to us with much less money than they presently have. And so over time they could make the adjustments that we've made, and I think that's the right way forward. But there has to be determination to bring that about. Taking the question on the council tax, this is always a vexed question. It becomes a highly political matter, and no doubt we shall have a debate about that when we get to the full council meeting in February, which is just about a month today, isn't it? It's all very close to that. But the higher you put council tax, the more it bears down on people on low incomes, and this is always in our minds. And it's true that the settlement has given us a little more flexibility than we'd anticipated, but there's all the other monies as well. So I think you'll have to wait until next Tuesday for our announcements on what we plan to put forward to the council.
Okay, I think
one further thing to add. Again, Mr. Charlesworth is right. The fairer funding will be blighted by caps, collars, floors, ceilings. So transition. I'm with Byron. It would be best to have it completely reset and then bring some pressure to bear on the ones that are overfunded, like Islington, like Surrey, because they haven't had the incentive to make the tough decisions we've had. You can look at Northampton, which is relatively badly funded. They've not made any tough decisions. That's why they're in a real mess. But places like Surrey and some of the London boroughs have had so much money, they've not had to go anywhere near some of the things that we've had to go to, and even sometimes you guys have supported us because you know that there is no money and we've got to do it. One other thing which I agree with Mr. Charlesworth about, which is again more than rare, is that growth is best delivered locally. We are the people who can deliver the growth that's required by acting strategically, showing where the houses can be built, showing where the industry can go, showing where the new roads are going to have to go to support this sort of development. And I just encourage Mr. Charlesworth to have a word with Mr. Bill next to him, who is not quite so positive on growth.
I said we're going to have that debate in a couple of weeks' time. I'm sure it's going to be robust, and I'm sure there'll be challenging evidence about whether the figures that we've got are in fact correct and the assumptions. But now I've got Terry Richardson, and then David, you just wanted to come back, and then I think we need to move on to the next section.
Mine really was just a small bit of clarification on something Byron said on the fair funding issue. About, we wouldn't want higher funded councils to have to do a slash and burn. But is that truly the case? I mean, last time I looked at the figures, general fund balances in councils were the highest they've been in history at 20.7 billion, which is why the government continually believes that councils can cut back. But if you then dig deeper into those figures, most of those balances are held by inner city councils who are having billions thrown at them anyway. So surely part of the fair funding discussion should not just be about being more efficient and reducing what they're spending, but about actually using some of their huge general fund balances, or in fact even redistributing some of their huge general fund balances. I mean, it's always interesting to me that some of the councils that do cut frontline services, places like Liverpool, are sitting on the highest cash balances in the country.
I mean, yes, I do agree with you. But I'm one of these people who is always conscious of the fact that it's not just about us as councillors and managing finance, it's about the people we serve. And what I mean, we've asked a lot of the people of Leicestershire in the last few years with the measures we've taken. We're going to ask a lot of them in the next few years with the further measures we've still got to take, sadly. But in the inner cities, of course, there are greater areas of deprivation, which has to be acknowledged as well. So any changes that take place and any restructuring has to take its time. I mean, much of our transformation programme has been done over several years, and it's about changing the way you do things as much as about actually the amount of money you put into particular aspects of the service. Because if you do change the way you do things, you can deliver not quite the same service because it's modelled in a different way, but you can deliver sometimes a more effective service than you previously had. And I think that they've got to be given the time, but also they have to be put under the pressure to make those sorts of changes. And we've gone through it, and I'm sure we'll be happy in the future to share our experiences with colleagues elsewhere in the country.
It's debatable, though, whether we've got through it in a position that is sustainable long term, isn't it? We talk about the cliff. We probably have different views on how close we are to that. We can't go on like this indefinitely, can we? You'd agree with that, Byron?
We can't go on reducing our costs. We are very close to the limits, and that is why so much of the programme we've got on the savings side of the programme is about service reduction. And some of the difficult areas where we're expecting to or hoping to get cost reductions are through efficiency savings are in themselves going to bring about some erosion of the quality of the service. That's what does disturb me about the future, which is why we now need to get this resolved and resolved as soon as possible.
Thank you. I think we'd all agree with that. Right, David, you just wanted to come back and then we'll move on.
Just a clarification. We touched on growth and we touched on what Nick said. I don't think I've actually mentioned housing at all. There is a requirement for young people to be able to afford to move out of the parental home and get their own properties. There is a need for communities to naturally grow. But what I am questioning is the imposed development of vast areas of the countryside for low employment industrial use, which has not come about as a requirement from local businesses to grow, which of course they should, but this has come about in some kind of national picture trying to impose industrial growth, which might be welcome, might not, but for which we seem to have little say. Is it to housing and industrial growth such as Magna Park and so on is a two separate questions.
And I suggest we take that up and pursue that in 2 weeks' time and see where we can get on understanding how much of it's local and how much of it's national. Good point, David. Okay, so I think we've done the overall position, the capital programme. We've understood what the threats are, what the opportunities might be, and the administration has declined to tell us what they're going to do on council tax, but we'll wait for next week for the cabinet papers to come out with great interest and then move on to the council meeting where the decision will be made. So can I thank everyone who's contributed to that section. Moving on then to the next item, which is item 9, which is the Chief Executive's Department's budget. Do we just need to change the top table a bit? So we are going to be joined by Gary Connors, Regulatory Services, Lornik Kwotovich, Planning, Historic and Natural Environment, Tom Pennell, Partnerships and Communities. Anthony Cross is already with us as the Scrutiny Commission's legal advisor, but representing legal services. And goodness, the table's getting long. Mo, are you joining us? Head of Democratic Services, if we can find some space for you. So what you'll see there now is all the heads of service for the Chief Executive's Department, the Chief Executive, of course, himself, and the leader, and Byron. And this item is to focus on the Chief Executive's budget. Right, who would like to, would anyone like to, or just want to go straight in to take questions? Okay, fine. So if I refer you to the report, headed item 9 on page 13, the overall situation, and then that moves into the growth items, and then over to the savings. Who would like to ask some questions on the Chief Exec's department? Everyone's holding off. Right, okay. Michael Charlesworth first, and then Rosita, and then Terry.
Somebody better
She's
start. It's just really on item 20, growth not required. You probably thought I'd ask this question. It just leaves it hanging there, the last sentence. However, this funding is no longer required. Because...
But basically, it's going nowhere. I mean, it's sitting on Saj's desk. Apparently he's going to be announcing something in the future, which we've no idea what it is, and I think it's just prudent not to carry it forward when we don't think we'll require it. Is that right, Chief?
I don't think there's any realistic prospect of needing the funding in the next financial year.
It's a shame, but we are where we are.
Was that it, Michael? Okay. Right, Terry.
Thank you, Chair. I've one overall point, which is number 8. I'd be interested to know, because all of service budgets, as I understand, have been compiled on the basis of no pay or price inflation, that at some point it would be useful to know what overall we are likely to see from all the different service areas, and what's the range of likely price and price pay and price inflation that we're going to achieve. Shall I list all the questions? I've got a few, or do you want me to?
I think we're going to need Chris to help us on that,
right,
because that is held in a central contingency in corporate resources.
Right.
Sorry, unless Sarah. Okay, do you want to answer the issue of how pay and prices
Is
is
it right
dealt
if
with?
I then come back and do
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the reason we hold a central contingency is so that we only transfer additional budget to departments when there is known pressures, certainly for contracts when they're up for renewal and there's an inflation pressure, and obviously we put some aside for the pay, and obviously that hasn't been agreed yet. Chris, do you want to advise how much we've put aside? Just looking. Oh, sorry.
sorry, that wasn't strictly the question. The question was, what's the range? You know, what are we looking at if inflation goes up at a certain level? You know, how much should we have? You know, if it rockets, you know, how much are we going to need? You know, is there somewhere? Someone must have somewhere a little table that says, this is how bad it could get if it goes up by 1%, 2%, etc.
I would imagine that the inflation will be around 3%, which is what's projected, and on the salaries, although it's shown as 2%, which we've budgeted for. When you look at the detail of the salary award, because it alters a lot of the spinal points, etc., I'm advised that the pay increase is about 5.4% over 2 years. So we are under a bit of pressure on the salary thing, because we only budgeted for a flat 2%. A lot of councils only budgeted for a flat 1%, so they're in a real mess. At least we budgeted for 2%, but because of the alterations in the spinal points, I'm advised it's 5.4 or even 5.9, but it's something we're going to have to consider at Cabinet next week, obviously, because we budgeted 2%, but it's 5 and a bit. Is that right, Chris?
That's about bang on. So in terms of inflation, we've budgeted 3% per year, and then we hold that in the central contingency. So hopefully that'll be enough in terms of just prices of services. The pressure is around pay in terms of the employer's offer, which Nick is right. We anticipate that will cost about 5.4% over 2 years. It's very much bottom loaded, that kind of potential pay award. And obviously our contingency only includes 2%, so we have a bit of a problem there. So again, we're going to have a look about how we kind of bridge that gap when we bring the proposals back in on the 9th of February.
Right, okay. It's fair to say there's often an underspend on the contingency, though, isn't there? It doesn't, from year to year, you often release that part way through and say you don't need it. I mean, what I'm saying is you don't need to over-egg it.
Yeah, in recent years we have had a little bit of an overspend, but in some years we've fully spent up that contingency. A lot of it depends on what happens around adult social care contracts and how that goes. But I mean, we have fully spent up that in some years.
I like to think our contingency is set at a prudent but safe level.
Yeah, but you don't want to set too much away, because then you have to make more cuts, and then if you release it part way through the year, that means you didn't need to do it in the first place.
A prudent and safe, Chairman, advised by the directors.
Okay. Terry, did you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. I have some more specific questions. I can see on point 28, trading standards, there's going to be a service review, and with a cut of 60,000, with prioritising resources. And I guess what I'd be curious about is what will not be prioritised. And I think that's the same theme all the way through. With the review planning, historic and natural environment services, we're going to be making savings through staffing reduction. So again, what isn't going to happen? And are we going to be able to manage our statutory duties? And then I was curious about point 18, where we seem to have had this sudden jump in the number of adult cases related to court of protection. I was wondering if we know why, and is there anything we can do to mitigate this? Is this because people are not taking up lasting powers of attorney while they still have capacity? Is there something that we could be doing as an authority to mitigate on that extra money?
Okay, there's quite a few points there which I think we're going to require different. Yeah, Gary, can you help with the issue of where am I right in saying that previously you haven't had to make significant cuts? There's been a recognition that this area, I think you made a statement at a presentation a while back, that it was one of the few areas that had been protected.
No, we have had to make savings in terms of the amount of work and enforcement work that will be expected from the service. We have done that in the past, although we have been listened to within the department, within chief execs. And it was acknowledged last year that we needed to make less savings on the basis of the workload. In answer to the question around where the focus really, we are an intelligence-led service, so it really depends where we pitch. What are the priorities? A practical example would be we will need to reduce the level of inspection. So this is proactive inspection out on the street. I particularly mentioned food sampling is one area. What we would not reduce on is if, for example, we got an allegation of an allergen in a food product with a takeaway meal, for example, where there was a potential risk health harm. That particular matter would be investigated and we would see it through. Where we now have to make decisions is on the proactive routine out on the street, a bit like the Bobby on the beat, if you like. We will have to reduce that to make this saving. We are very much intelligence-led and we use systems that allow us to identify where the key threats to Leicestershire are in terms of consumer protection, and particularly in relation to protecting legitimate businesses and getting that balance. So really it's around the inspection area and the sampling, the proactive work that we will have to do a little less of.
Okay, and on 21, the legal caseloads and complexity, who would like to respond to that?
So I think that's paragraph 18 that Dr. Inan referred to. Yes, it's a national issue arising out of a case that was in the Supreme Court in 2014, which requires local authority to place before the Court of Protection any cases relating to service users who lack mental capacity to secure approval for the detention of that person in residential or accommodation where their liberty may be restricted. I think it's recognised nationally as being a problem that is overwhelming the Court of Protection, and there is a Law Commission undertaking a review of the necessity, really, to bring those sorts of cases before the Court of Protection. That Commission report is due in the next sort of 12 months or so, and I think I can't say with confidence, but I think that legal commentators are suggesting that there will be a review that will bring us back to where we were pre-2014, and not everything will have to go before the Court of Protection that does at the moment. So I think it is perhaps a short-term issue, but at the moment we haven't got an end date in sight.
Just picking up on that, you also say that one of the reasons is that outsourcing has led to some service quality issues. Is that because it's very the expertise is an expertise issue, or are we just not being served right?
It's a combination, Chair. The way that the legal services operate in terms of social care legal support is in a team-based environment. So if a solicitor is out at court doing a care application, for example, and an issue comes in on a case that a social worker wants advice on, there is always going to be someone available within the team. We operate a duty system to ensure that this happens, to provide advice to that social worker. Clearly, our solicitors know how our council operates and what our services department requirements are. So we're already in the same sort of space with them about how to deliver the service they require. That doesn't happen in the private sector. So if we instruct a firm of solicitors to cover a case, it will be allocated to one solicitor. If he or she is out at court, you may get hold of his or her secretary to help take a message, maybe get a message to someone urgently, but there isn't the backup available to support social workers that they are used to, and the sort of feedback we get is that and in fact it backfires, because what happens is they can't get hold of the solicitor in private practice, they phone us anyway. So it's not really efficient, it's not meeting the client's requirements, so their clear preference is that we deliver in-house through our team of solicitors who do social care litigation.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Paragraph 26,
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the planning issue, clearly we'll continue to meet our statutory requirements because we have to. The consequences may be how well we meet that requirement. At the moment, we are almost de facto meeting those reductions because we're finding it very difficult to recruit. So we are a bit down, but nevertheless, our performance is still fairly good. 97% in terms of planning applications at a national scale, so we're doing quite well.
Our local plan, we've had to engage consultants to help us with that. So we've got money from people we can't appoint to do that. So we'll continue to do that. The area where we might have to reduce is on enforcement and monitoring. But the monitoring aspect does generate an income, so it's a bit of a catch-22. So we're going to have to manage the way we do that the best we can. The other side of the service is the historic and natural environment, which we have service-level agreements with most of the districts. We make fairly good income. We don't totally cover our costs, but we clearly aim to maximise the income that we can get for the service that we provide.
So just on that, the districts are going to be putting up, being told they can put up their planning fees quite considerably in the next few months from the 1st of April. So that doesn't apply to us, does it, other than on County Act Matters applications? Are you looking at whether you could have an increase in those sorts of charges?
Thank you, Chairman. The planning fees do apply to the County Council as well for the applications that we determine. So there will be an increase of income probably in the region of £20,000 to £25,000, which will go obviously some way towards that 40,000 saving. So it will be helpful.
But what about the service level agreements then? If is there an opportunity to get some more income?
Chairman, there's always that opportunity exists. I have factored in an inflation growth for next year. Whether we can negotiate a higher price is something that we'll certainly have a look at.
So it's possible you might be able to go a considerable way to offsetting that 40,000 in the way you've described.
Correct.
Okay, that's helpful to know that. Terry, are you happy? Yeah. Right. Anybody else want to? David. Yeah, I've got David, and then I've got Michael wants to come back.
Chairman, on that last point, I think most members would very much regret any reduction in enforcement. And this is a matter which is brought to us as elected members all the time on a continual basis. The fact that planning consent is granted and that the conditions are not always complied with. So I would hope that we could avoid any reduction. In fact, I'd like to see a boosting of enforcement all round. And could I also just, if somebody outside this meeting possibly could let me know about the relocation of the Hinckley Registry Office, which is going to save 170,000. I find that hard to believe in itself because it is already in an attractive setting. So I can't really see the justification for taking it out of that building and creating another one, unless the rent's too high for where it is. But perhaps somebody could let me know outside what's happening there.
Do you want to answer that now, Gary? Or?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the income from where the current location is, would indicate it is not drawing in as much as we would expect. We have looked at alternative possible sites, but it is very early stages. We haven't yet found anything that's suitable. Parking and some of the other issues around where it is at the minute it does cause some difficulties, but I think we've just about to open a new ceremony room at Wigston. With that in mind, it's probably going to be later in the year before we'd revisit this issue. But I'm happy to get the registration manager to provide you with a bit more information.
And then Michael Charlesworth, you want to?
Thank you, Chair. If I'm mistaken, let me know, but don't political assistants come under this department? Because now that we've made the decision to delete them, shouldn't they be down as a saving and the advisor to the Cabinet be down as a growth?
Right. We normally do net, we don't just net things off, do we? We put something in if it's a saving, and then we put something in if it's growth. Does anybody comment? It's in the base. Okay. Right. Thank you very much. Any other points on the Chief Exec's department, or can we let these good people get back to the day job?
That's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. We will now change the table to the Corporate Resources Department. And we are joined by Brian Roberts, Director of Corporate Resources. Chris Tambini is back with us, and Sarah Smith, Business Partner. Byron Rhodes is still here, Deputy Leader of Resources Spokes, Nick Rushton, Leader, and John Sinnott, Chief Exec. Would anybody like to start? Brian, would you like to make an introduction?
Briefly, thank you, Chairman. Just some contextual things, really. I think the department since 2010 has delivered £19 million of savings, and obviously with plans to deliver another £5 million. I think that reflects the overall county council strategy, which is the balance of its savings that come from efficiencies rather than service cuts. And clearly, the corporate resources has delivered heavily in terms of being a more efficient organisation. It's a large department. There's about 1,700 people, 1,100 FTEs across a range of services, with a gross spend of just shy of £77 million. But obviously the net expenditure of 31 is offset by significant income that comes in, of which a big chunk of that is from trading of our commercial activities, something like £26 million. And I would just draw members' attention to paragraph 10 and the table in that, which shows the net budget. And there you're seeing commercial services net contribution of £2.6 million. Actually, in 2016-17, that was a shade under £900,000 a year. So it shows how we've developed our commercial activities through a combination of additional income and cutting our costs in terms of delivering those services and that. So that is now starting to make a material impact. We're very keen to continue that, and it's interesting that a number of authorities are now talking about insourcing and commercial activities. Well, Leicestershire's been on with that game for some time. It's invested, and we've had those discussions here. Very much helped and directed by a 5-member scrutiny panel we had a few years ago, and a few members contributed into the strategy and that really helped set the agenda which we've been on with in recent years, and will feature very strongly going forward. So we very much see that as an alternative to cutting services in terms of the department and that. In terms of going forward, I think I always align it to saying that you can only take out so many payroll clerks before you can't deliver a payroll service. In other words, if you need to continue to be efficient and make savings in those areas, you have to deliver the payroll service in a different way. And that's the challenge for us around transforming the way we provide support services. Having got the transformation unit within the department, and I think that is an important facility to the county council overall, but it is to my own department itself. And we're transforming the way we go forward. I know Scrutiny's looked at the Fit for Future and the Oracle change we're talking about, and there's a useful debate and comments in on that. And again, we would expect to deliver services very differently in terms going forward, in terms of points of detail, in terms of how we interact with our creditors and suppliers, and providing more up-to-date information about where their invoices are in the system, and speeding up payments. Again, a very topical issue, particularly around SMEs and in terms of supporting them. That has been a big commitment here to ensure that we make payments to SMEs very, very quickly, and that new systems will allow us to develop that. And that will go right through then into more added value areas around having better financial and operational information, so that our frontline services, our managers, can manage those services much better, having up-to-date information at the tips of their fingers in terms of moving their services forward to that. So we are at a point in time to deliver the savings ongoing. Will be another round of transformation. I think your support services, both internally and where we provide them externally, will look quite radically different over the next 3 or 4 years. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just add something to that?
Yes.
One of the things that we should be proud of, and when I go and meet other county leaders and upper tier authorities, is the trading income which Brian generates. It, particularly the traded services with schools and academies. So they don't come to us because they're now forced to. They come to Brian and his team because we provide a excellent service to them and help them as best we can. And if you go to some other counties, they haven't got this at all. They've just cast them adrift and not helped them, and now they're regretting that they've done that, but they're coming from a very bad situation, whereas we had a positive thing to help people become academies, but when they became academies, again, positively wanting to help them to run their businesses, and that is reflected in the amount of income that Brian and his team get in, which is vast in our budget, but compared to other councils is incredibly vast.
Yes, I agree with you entirely. One of the biggest items there, of course, is school food. That was, goodness, how many years ago? We externalised it. And then there was a scrutiny panel chaired by the late Matthew O'Callaghan, who recommended it come back in-house. So perhaps we should thank him for that at least. Because that makes space significant, and the feedback you get now generally on meals is a lot better than it used to be when it was externalised in terms of what the children actually enjoy. So yeah, that's all positive. Can I just raise a couple of points on 45, where the overall budget? What is the centre of excellence? What does that do? And I noticed that it has a zero cost, because whatever it costs then comes back in external income. And then a little bit further down, marketing and communications. Note that we're still spending over £1 million on marketing and communications. I think put this to Byron, really. Can we justify that spend level? There was a strategy to bring this down some years ago, Byron. We made a number of savings in marketing and community. We reduced the number of Leicestershire matters, and yet, we're still spending over £1 million in this area. Can we justify that?
I think we can. I mean, we have a duty to inform people, and in informing people, you can't just do it by the occasional newspaper, because it doesn't have the same effect. So we spend quite a lot of our time now in putting together information, which also, of course, we publish through Facebook and Twitter, and also through the website, and constantly keep things up to date. And this does mean we have to employ professionals to do it. And of course we do extensive consultation as well. So yeah, I think it's money well spent.
Can I just add to that, Chairman? I think Mr. Rhodes is absolutely right in terms of that. A few years ago, when we brought comms and media together, and I'm very happy to demonstrate this, we took in excess of 70% expenditure out. So we were spending millions more than we are currently now. I actually think, and I think Mr. Rhodes alluded to this earlier about some other authorities, that actually you can spend less and actually provide a better service in some ways than that. And I think our comms and media, because it's very focused, we do really get value for every buck we spend in that area. But I'm very happy to provide members with a breakdown of that budget just to see where the expenditure is going. And there's various services in there, including the translation service and things like that, which would be very happy to show. In terms of the Centre of Excellence, that is a national thing that is run, hosted within the County Council around sharing information across local authorities and the public sector generally in that. So it's cost neutral to us. We do host it. There is actually a proposal that hosting will actually cease by this summer and somebody else will take that on. But it has no financial impact other than we do get some rental income from them being based at County Hall.
Okay.
On the comms, I mean, don't forget, 3 years ago it was 3 million that we could actually identify, but don't forget as well, when I did Highways and Transportation years and years ago, Highways and Transportation had a little comms budget, which wasn't actually written down, but it was there and it did it. So we can identify it's gone from 3 million to 1 million, but in my view it's probably gone from 4 million to 1 million because it's now all corporate communications, all done through one department. And as Byron says, we do need to have a fairly decent budget in there because we do a lot of trying to communicate with members of the public, and we're always consulting people on something. All the time we're consulting, and it's all done corporately. So it's nicer for you that you can identify it, nicer for us as the administration that we've got the cost down, and also even more nicer that we actually know now what we're spending on communications because it's all held corporately. So I think it's a good achievement.
Okay, and the only other one I wanted to ask about was this 188,000 trade union. Can you explain what we're paying for there?
Yeah, that's 4 posts for the trade union for the whole organisation.
Sorry, can you sort of amplify? So we're funding posts.
That is correct. I think.
Is it to support staff and members? Is it as union members?
Yeah. Well, I think it's there primarily to support staff, as you say, from various aspects in terms of supporting it. We clearly go through processes of continually doing HR action plans and that, and we need to negotiate and seek consultation with the unions and that. And I think that money and that contribution helps for a very efficient process between the county council and its aspirations and plans, but reflecting that there should be the right support given to our staff members as they go through those action plans, and that is part of the cost of that process.
It's an easy one for probably more my side members to pick on and say we shouldn't fund it, but in my view we should fund it because, as Brian says, we're always asking the unions about this, that and the other, and the staff are important. It's best to bring the staff along with us because we've always had a good relationship with our staff and haven't shirked at funding the general public. I think it's a lot of money, but when you think how many staff we've got and how many millions of turnover, and most of our turnover is staff, in my view it's well worth having to maintain the excellent relationship we've got with the staff. And again, in my view, it's a small amount to pay to maintain that relationship with the staff.
Thank you. Just wanted clarification on what it was for. Terry Einham.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank the leader for his comments about the usefulness of good trade union relations, which is clearly something that my side would support. And with that in mind, I've got 2 questions, and perhaps if I take them separately. I'd like to focus on the staff absence reduction. It's mentioned on 23, and then it comes up again in 27. And it describes a targeted absence programme on an invest-to-save basis. Absence-related savings will appear in individual department budgets. I'm curious as how this is all going to work and where it's being scrutinised and how that is being negotiated with the trade unions to ensure it's effective.
I can give some detail, but as Chairman of the Employment Committee, Byron, you may want to say something initially.
Yes, I mean, this initiative came from the Employment Committee, which of course is all party, because of born out of long concerns we've had for the total level of absence, which is monitored and reported to us on a regular basis. And it's much higher in some departments than in others. And we have an overall target figure of 7.5 days on average per person absent. But in fact, some departments exceed that by quite a considerable margin. Now, we've done a lot of work through the Employment Committee to try to determine the reasons for that. An awful lot of analysis has been done. And quite a few measures have been put in place, but the figure still stays stubbornly high. And we've come to the conclusion much of it actually in the end rests with the managers, the first line managers actually, talking directly to their staffs and managing their departments and sections properly, so that people are encouraged to return to work after they've had short-term illness. On the other hand, of course, not encouraged to be here when they've got an illness they can easily spread to other people, which we wouldn't advocate. And therefore, what we've done is put a target in this year for each department to take measures over a period of time, because we don't expect it to happen immediately. It will take some time to gradually reduce that figure, so that we can harmonise the maximum figure across the whole council and get similar results across all departments.
Very briefly to add to that's absolutely the case. So in effect, departments are incentivised to drive down the sickness levels through the financial targets that have been set. I think two other things we've tried after discussions with the Employment Committee. We introduced a triage service that we piloted in a couple of areas. That's not been that effective actually, and we're in the course of abandoning that in the sense that it hasn't had the right results. But what has started to show signs of working is where we've had some intense support going in from managers, provided by HR and that, and that's been in a pilot mode as well. And the view of the corporate management team is that that was due to end in July, and the view is that should be extended for a further 2 years. It'll be supported out the transformation reserve in terms of that, because that is actually showing some improvements in the overall levels of sickness in terms of that. So one pilot was a success, another one wasn't, but overall we're trying to drive down to the target of 7.5 days per person per annum.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm very pleased to hear it. I did have concerns about one of the pilots, and this sounds like a more transformative and systems approach to what we're trying to do, so I shall be watching that one with interest. My other question, though, Chair, was on 17, and it's mentioned again on 30. I understand the point is to invest some of our cash reserves, presumably, into property, but I think the concerns raised in 30 about investments for income generation purposes, clearly we aren't going to be borrowing, but I think that taxpayers might be concerned if we were investing in other areas rather than Leicestershire, that surely as this council we should be wanting to invest in our own council area. So I'd be interested to know how much we are investing outside the boundaries of Leicestershire.
Yeah, I'll give you the principles of it. Chris will perhaps provide some figures. The great majority of the investment is found within Leicestershire, and I agree with you that it's right that where we can get a win-win situation where we invest in the property and it encourages business activity within Leicestershire, that's to the advantage of not just our budgets, but also to the general prosperity of the county. But there are other opportunities, and sometimes they're very good opportunities that come about quite nearby, which are literally too good to miss. So we're just a little bit of flexibility, but we try to keep it in balance so it's a sensible one, and we don't invest in excessive amounts outside the county. We're not borrowing money to do this. This is something the government have grumbled about. I mean, there was one council who borrowed a huge sum of money to buy the headquarters of, I think it was it BP or Shell within their bailiwick. The danger of taking too far and overcommitting yourself, of course, is you get a void, and then you've got if you're borrowing money, you've got interest to pay and costs to pay, and you haven't got the rentals coming in. So you've got to have high quality property, and you've got to do it very, very carefully. But Mr. Tambini will give you the figures, and I don't think they're unreasonable.
We also don't want to be too constrained. I can't just say Leicestershire because obviously we need to maximise the rate of return, and it's the return that you're looking for. But we're not doing, say, like some doing, borrowing at 1.5% from the prudential borrowing and then buying an asset, say, in Scotland that produces 4%. Okay, you've got 3.5% split, or 2.5%. My maths is failing me. But that is high risk. So we're only using money we've got, but it is a balance between what Byron says of investing locally, where it helps the local economy and gives us a rate of return. But also, if you're in banking or in property, you do want a rate of return and you want secure tenants. So it's a balance between those two. But the ones I've seen, I've not seen anything which jumped out of me as being like buying an asset in Glasgow or anything like that. But Chris will know more about individual properties.
Just picking up on the Spelthorpe District Council example, they borrowed 500 million to invest in property. If we scaled that up to us, I think we'd be borrowing about 17.5 billion to invest in property. Our ambition is much more modest than that, to be honest. We're looking at a £200 million kind of property fund. So far, in terms of investing inside and outside the county, we made one investment outside the county in Lichfield. And the only investments we really look for outside the county, and these are based on kind of return and risk, are really those that are fairly close to Leicestershire, because we were managing those properties. I mean, there's no point in having a property in Glasgow or Edinburgh when you've got to drive there to manage them. So they literally are ones that will be on our border or fairly close to the border. And I'd say our overall investment is around kind of 200 million within that overall envelope. The only other comment I'd make is in terms of the investments we've made outside the county, they are more around purchasing assets that are already there, while a lot of the investments within the county are around developing bits of land that we already have and actually building things. So it's a much more of a developer role rather than just purchasing assets that already exist.
Okay, does that answer your question?
Thank you, Chair. That is most reassuring. Yes, I think Lichfield is perhaps far enough, and the more that we can invest in our own communities, the better.
Okay, I mean, this is something from time to time we will ask for a report on and scrutinise so that we can know what's happening in more detail. Right, Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chairman. Mine is on paragraph 29 on page 36. I'm very heartened by seeing the efforts we're making in saving energy, etc. My question really is around paragraph 3 about the partnership with the energy company. I just wondered what that looks like. So is it in terms of they get all the feed-in tariff and we're saving on bills, or are we getting any feed-in tariff funding? Did we go for the biomass boiler rather than look at solar thermal? Because I think everything that's so far gone on the roof is solar PV. And with the amount of land we owned, particularly rural land, have we done any work on looking at solar farms and or wind turbines, which do generate a huge amount of income? And whilst a lot of people don't like wind turbines, I think they're lovely. So, and I'd have one in my back garden if I could.
So you'll be writing it in. You'll be writing this into the Blaby local plan, then, will you? And put them all there.
I'm here as a county councillor, so.
I would just give you a general comment on that. I've not encouraged officers to look at wind turbine opportunities. You can criticise me as much as you like or otherwise, but that's the view I take. Solar panels and solar farms, I take a different view, and we have been looking at some opportunities in that area. But of course, the principal investment we've got at the moment is in this building, where we've put extensive numbers of solar panels on the roof. An idea which I would concede first came from the Liberal Democrat group, but which we took up. And with some success, it's worked out well for us. The biomass boiler, of course, complements that. I think any technical details I'd have to refer to some officers to help me with.
So the other question was around the feed-in tariff. What's the arrangement? And then also, why did we go for the biomass boiler?
I'd have to go back and get a bit more detail, but the biomass boiler, there were certain subsidies around that. I can't remember the exact detail, which kind of made sense financially, as well as in terms of the ecological kind of benefits from it. And the feed-in tariff, I'll have to get back to you in terms of the detail on that.
Arrange for you to get a note on that. Sorry, Sarah, can you add?
I worked on some of the early Score Plus models, and it was a combination really of balancing the feed-in tariffs and the other benefits between both our partnership, the schools and the council, if that helps.
Okay, does that answer the query? Right, I've got Michael Charlesworth.
Thank you, Chair. Just on traded services, are we allowed to go beyond our borders and go into Northants, say, and provide services? And my only other comment is the customer service. We're holding a couple of posts, vacant posts, a couple of posts to go and a management post. I know we get yearly updates on the operations of customer services, but it does concern me. That's a reputational thing there. If we don't get customer services right, it presents a pretty poor image. And I just wonder, putting the focus on those that are left, it ties into Dr. Ryan's comments about staff absence. The more we ask staff to do, the more pressure they're under, the more absence we get. It's a fine balancing act, I know, and departmental managers and supervisors have got a big role to play there. So I don't want staff to be under that much pressure. They're taking more absence.
If I can start, the answer: do we trade outside our boundary? Yes, absolutely. We, for example, provide IT support to a number of schools in Stoke, and we provide services to some Leicester schools and various areas. So yeah, we do trade beyond our boundaries, but not just in school meals terms, but in other services as well. And our aim is to do more of that. As people withdraw from the market, as the leader has outlined, then if it makes financial sense to us, we'll try and fill that vacuum. The assurity of a very well-run public service operation, I think, will continue to be, and if not anything, grow in terms of it being a very attractive offer, I think, to people in terms of providing services within the public sector. In terms of the customer service centre, I absolutely take the point. It's a key frontline service in terms of our interaction with the public in Leicestershire, and the performance of that is very important. In terms of making some savings, it's around efficiencies. We're taking out a little bit of management infrastructure at the margins. If we make the reductions proposed, which are planned over a year or two, then we would probably reduce our agents, the people actually on the phone, from about 62 to about 58. So it's a fairly modest reduction. But I think we're looking to invest in a new telephony system and things like that. So we think the technology will allow us to do that, improve the service, but take out some cost at the same time.
Are you okay, Michael? Yeah, with that? Right, I don't have any other people wishing to raise issues on the corporate resources. So can I thank officers who contributed to that. That takes us then to item 11, which is to consider the additional paper, which is the agenda supplement, and that is the minutes or notes of each of the scrutiny committees. And our role there is really to note those as the comments that will be being sent to the Cabinet to look at in advance of their meeting on the 12th. But there's also an opportunity for members to highlight any particular issues that they feel are extremely difficult, particularly as savings, or to seek any further information. So I'll just briefly go through each of those. The first one then is children and families, held on the 15th of January, and you'll see the minute extract on page 3. Clearly, the key issue in that department is the reduction in prevention services and that review, which I believe the consultation, we had an email come around say the consultation's starting very soon on that. So has anybody got any further comments, or do you want any further information regarding children and family services? Mr. Bill.
Assistant Chairman, Mr. Welsh and myself asked for our names to be recorded against that particular item. So if we could, I'm just speaking for myself here, I suppose, if I could ask for that to be recorded again this morning, please.
Yes, that is recorded. Okay. No further items on that committee to raise. Page 9 then is the Adults and Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 16th of January. Minute extract there. Going right on to page 12. Any further points or issues there? No? Okay. And then on page 13 is the Environment and Transport Department. Savings there. I think highlighting the savings in relation to SEN transport. Now, just some clarity around that. The consultation on that is closed, and presumably now you're going to be looking to take a decision on that at Cabinet sometime. It's not on for the next forward plan, is it? So you'll be looking at March, really, to take a decision on the SEN transport?
Well, it'll be when the consultation is finished.
It's finished just before Christmas.
Oh, sorry, that case I think it'll be the Cabinet meeting. It will be scheduled, I just don't know. Will be scheduled, yes.
So there's that one. There's the issue of whether you're going to install parking meters. I think that is relatively controversial. Work is ongoing on that, but it still forms part of the savings. And then ET4, bringing back the review of passenger transport. Now, I think, Nick, if you could make a comment on this, because in the end, on the 1.2 million last year, you withdrew that on the day of the meeting and recognised that it really was going too far. It would have just about removed all bus services apart from the park and ride. But we are concerned to see this going back in as a potential review, albeit for now for 400,000.
Yeah, I think it's in 2019, isn't it, Chief? Yeah. So what's happened, all bus contracts have been extended, so they're all coterminous with a finish in, I think it's June of 2019, and then we can look at the whole service across the piece. Obviously, it's a very sensitive issue for myself, because a lot of my voters like subsidising like buses and transport, so it will be handled exceedingly sensitively, but what we can't afford to do as a matter of principle is subsidise some people on some of the routes. You're subsidising people £17 a head. Now that is unsustainable. If they have no transport, other means of transport will have to be provided, but it may or may not be buses. And then in some areas you've got subsidised routes that are perhaps only £1. Well, they're well worth keeping on. In fact, there's almost an argument they should be commercial, but it's a long-term thing. It's got to be in there because, as you can see from our budget going forward, we have, as you referred to earlier on, cliff edges where very, very difficult decisions may have to be made on things like reductions in service. But at the moment it sits in there with the full review starting in when all the bus services contracts are all coming to an end together, to have a proper look at. That's about the bottom line, as far as I'm aware. Is that correct, Chief?
Just one sec.
You're just checking when it is, but I know all the bus services contracts have all been regularised, because we've got some which are expiring like next week. Well, you can't just look at one if you're running a county-wide service. I know in a lot of areas, though, Simon, they've already eliminated all their subsidised bus routes, and it's not something I'd ideally want to have to do. But Byron may add something on money more than that. But I saw your comments and I saw your article in the Mercury, which didn't go down particularly well. But there you go.
I think there was some surprise that this was brought back in so quickly after it had been taken out on the day of the meeting.
Well, I mean, we did say it, and I said at the council meeting on the 22nd of February that although we were withdrawing that measure at that time, which was 1.3 million saving out of a £2.5 million budget, that we would do a further review. And the initial appraisal of that review is that 400,000 is a sensible figure to put into the MTFS in the future. And as part of that, we've extended the contracts, as the leader has said, until June of 2019. So it basically enables us to harmonise any changes that we may put forward. We've still got quite a bit of work to do on this, so it's not possible at this stage to say exactly what we'll be suggesting is done. But certainly we're trying to save a little bit of money from this budget.
So to clarify what you said, Nick, you're talking about having some sort of threshold whereby we'd say, well, anything below this represents value for money, but if it's costing more than that per journey, then we've got to look at it on those, because you're right, there were some around £16.
To be fair, Simon, the review hasn't been done, but if I was looking at it like a normal person would look at it on the street, you would think that £17 per journey is excessive. But the review hasn't been done. It's just a personal view as the leader that I think £17 per journey at the extreme is too much. But it's the review to look at, and obviously there's people, Blake will be in charge of the review, Byron will be looking at it, and obviously as the leader
I don't think Blake would be doing that, would
Pam,
he?
sorry, no, Pam, sorry. Well, yeah, Pam, sorry, got it wrong.
Okay, well, that clarity is helpful in terms of what it is. David?
Thank you, David. I suppose being slightly controversial, I mean, if you're really looking forward, the strategic growth plan, I mean, if you were to put more development in rural settings, it might attract private bus operators to provide a service. But the strategic growth plan actually says don't do development in rural settings, which means that they're ever harder to reach going forward. I just think you can't have your cake and eat it.
Mr. Bill doesn't want them in rural settings, so he doesn't want any development at all.
I don't think that's true.
Oh, no. Probably a bit harsh, but I like to tweak his tail.
Yes, there has to be organic growth villages, because villages will die if we don't. If we don't allow growth on the outsides of villages, the young people will simply leave, and you start a gradual decline, and in the end, the whole community dies. So there has to be a sensible approach to it. Just to be consistent again, Chairman, Mr. Bolter this time and myself voted against 3 items: ET4, which is the bus subsidies, which we're talking about, and again there has to be a sensible approach to it. ET5 and ET10. Just on the principle of what we're doing here, though, if we start a consultation and whatever the if we impose, effectively agree to cuts before the consultation has ended, then all that will be said at the end of the consultation, when a decision is going to be taken, well, you've already agreed to take this money out, and therefore whatever the consultation comes up with, it's too late. Therefore, in principle, we wish to oppose ET4, ET5 and ET10. And on ET10, the on-street parking charges, it's never been explained to me how this is going to operate in areas which are predominantly residential. Because in the market towns, the amount of roads that are totally occupied by shops are very few. You might have one high street and another street perhaps, but I don't think it's going to be worthwhile installing parking meters in just those, in a minimal number of streets. And if you go into the residential areas, you will be discouraging people from parking outside their own homes, or forcing them to pay. It isn't going to work, and we've consistently said this for a number of years.
Okay, thank you for that.
is in danger of reopening the debate really on here. I mean, these are long-term strategic things. At the moment, nobody's ever mentioned to me as leader that we're going to put parking meters on residential streets. I've heard talk about some of the market towns where the parking is at a premium, but nobody's mentioned ever putting one, say, outside your house, Mr. Bill.
All yours.
Oh, I don't mind one outside mine.
Just to come back, then I think we need. I've been asking for this information all along. That if this study has been taking place now for 2 years, the officers here must have some idea of which streets they intend to introduce these charges. And I've asked for that, and if we can actually see a plan, then we could actually vote on it. But without a plan,
what we've clarified is that it's due to come in 2019. So if you are going to do that, you need traffic regulation orders. You need to install the meters. You are going to have to get on with it in the next 6 months. Otherwise, your timetable's not going to be met. So I think it's safe to assume there'll be a decision on this one way or another in the next 6 months. Is that reasonable?
If I can just say, look, if you've got a medium-term financial strategy, you're really confident if you've got a lot of the detail in place for your first year, because you're looking at a fairly short time horizon. As you get further out, you're looking at measures that you could take, and some of these are slightly optional and need further development. And it is fair to say that we don't have everything developed for the whole 4 years, nor could we. I mean, it would be quite impossible to do that. And so you have to have an indication of the direction of travel. Otherwise, you're only effectively looking 1 year ahead. And some councils, I'm sad to say, do only look 1 year ahead in their budgeting. And there's councils, some of those are finding life very difficult at the moment. We don't find life difficult because we do think ahead and develop things in an orderly fashion.
Yeah, but your budget assumes an income of 600,000 from 2019. So you've got just over a year, and the advice I've got is that the lead-in time for this to make the orders and so on is getting quite tight.
In the fullness of time, it will all come forward.
We'll leave it at that. Right, I've got David Slater.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to confirm that Mr. Bill and Mr. Bolter did make their opinions known, as they always do, God bless them, but we didn't have a vote on anything. So the vote that Mr. Bill referred to didn't happen. It was a collection of individual thoughts that we put forward on our paper. And I can also say that members were informed, specifically with ET4 and ET10, it is far too early to go into the sort of detail that Mr. Bill was asking for, and both the lead member and the officers concerned said that they had not got the information yet that was asked for, but members were satisfied that these bills are these policy decisions are ongoing, and we will have the chance to discuss them in greater detail when the information that Mr. Bill requested is available. But it isn't there now, and members were satisfied with that going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Your concerns are noted in the minutes, as you have the right to do. Are there any other questions in E&T? Right, that takes us finally then to health. Any issues further to be raised on health committee? No. Right, so that means we've completed all the items. Rosemary has been taking copious notes of our meeting today. They will be forwarded to the Cabinet, as will the rest of the minutes of the scrutiny committees. We go to Cabinet on the 12th for any changes to the budget, and then a final budget to be proposed to the Council in a month's time. Can I thank everyone for coming this morning? I think we've had a good debate. We've explored some of the issues. We've agreed on a lot of things. As usual, it tends to come down to about half a dozen issues where there's disagreement on individual savings items. Can I just remind members of the Commission that the next meeting is on the 7th of February, and as has been alluded to, we'll be focusing a single issue item on the strategic growth plan. With that, thank you very much. I'll close the meeting.
Just because they're not a planning authority.
No, indeed not. You can tell them, Terry.
I will.
Good exciting stuff.
Just later, I'll just turn your microphone.
Well, you're still on the